because they're also the same bastards who are now killing the men as well, because men are facing violence too. It's violence. Many murders by men are not just men being murdered by other murderers. They are actually normal average day Joes very often. Can I say, like myself, am I an average day Joe? Anyway, we're getting murdered by men too. It's seldom that we're getting murdered by women unless it's our wives. My name is Dean Haystack, the Dean, and you're listening to The Coffee Conversation. Okay, here we go. A little bit of a change of pace today, and I'm going to get into a poo load of trouble for this one, I'm pretty sure. We've got the marches that are happening now, the protests about gender-based violence, GBV, nice little acronym. And then we've got, it's about the murder and rape and abuse of women and children and the LGBTQ societies. And I agree, we need to reduce the violence. Where does violence come from? This is where I'm going to get into serious amounts of poop. So there's a prayer that when you, and it's used often in rehabilitation, but it's actually taken from a prayer, is, Lord, grant me the serenity to change the things that I cannot accept the things that I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there's two things in that prayer. Number one, grant me the serenity to change the things that I cannot accept. It's not for someone else to do. And then it's not that you can change everything. There's some things that you have to accept can't change. So, where does violence come from? Most men are more aggressive and more physical than most women. Some women are more aggressive than some men, and some women are more physical. So it's not that the violence only comes from men, but I'm agreeing it comes mostly from the men. And the most violent people are always men. That's why at the end of the scale you find a lot more violent criminals in prison that are men than women. You do still find violent women in prison as well, because violence has an origin. Now, why is it the men? Now, these are what the stats have told. I've researched this, and what the stats tells us is that, before I go there, let me get into trouble. Let me get into some poop here. Just imagine, and I'm not going to say that we could remove it, but just imagine that it didn't exist. Imagine that sex outside of marriage did not exist. What would the outcome be? If I say if we remove it, that implies violence. We can't remove it. We have to accept what we cannot change. But we have to change what we don't want to accept. If there was no such thing as sex outside of marriage, number one, there's no sexually transmitted diseases. There's much fewer divorces. There's no single parents. This is a big one. There's no children without fathers unless it's caused by divorce or death, and that's only a fraction of the portion. Now, layering on that, this whole two-parent family, what is the outcome of a one-parent family? Well, most of the single-parent families obviously come from women predominantly, because men can't give birth to children, and those women are mostly teenagers or young ladies who either don't finish their education or who don't further their education. So what that leads to is children being brought up in a lower lifestyle, and in most incidents in poverty. Those young boys who don't have a father to protect them then get abused and become abusers. They don't have a father or a husband to protect the woman, and that's where a lot of abuse happens, because sometimes people don't do things because they're bad, because we're all bad. Sometimes they only get away with it, and that's why they do it. So we have this thing in South Africa that there is the right to protest. Please tell me where we have the right to riot and damage things. We don't have the right to do that, yet they do it, those that do it, because they can. So sometimes people just do bad stuff because you can. So the violence starts there with the single parent family. So the woman gets abused, the children get abused, the children don't have fathers to look up to, they also don't have role models to help them to aspire to, so they feel like they are irrelevant. So they then have to get their relevance somewhere else. This is documented facts. They then start jumping on and off trains to prove that they're young men. Then they start riding on the trains as an example, and then a little gang of them gets together and they want to become more significant as men, so they start getting involved in violence. Normally starts off with petty crimes, like maybe some theft, then it becomes a mugging, then it becomes a hijacking, and then it gets worse and worse. So now they've got into the cycle of violence. Well, what difference does it make if I hit a man, a woman, or a child? Because they're also the same bastards who are now killing the men as well, because men are facing facing violence too. It's violence. Many murders by men are not just men being murdered by other murderers. They are actually normal, average day Joes very often. Can I say, like myself, am I an average day Joe? Anyway, we're getting murdered by men too. It's seldom that we're getting murdered by women unless it's our wives. And a guy walked into the hospital the other day with an axe in his head, and that was his. And he wasn't. She wasn't defending herself. She had attacked him. It was his girlfriend. So there is violence that women commit too. So we want to protect our children. We want to protect our women. Well, the best person to do that is the father, and the fathers are absent. So if there was no such thing as sex out of marriage, we would have no sexually transmitted diseases, a much lower crime rate because there's much lower poverty, a much higher rate of mental health because most people with depression are single parent children, and a lot of society's ailments disappear. Now, I'm not saying it's the only reason why we have gender-based violence, but it's clearly the most prolific reason. So men, stop being weak, keep your little chap in your pants, and women, stop being loose, stop letting the men abuse you. If that cycle can change, the gender-based violence stats over the next, and the child abuse stats over the next 20 years will drop probably to about 10 to 15% of where it is today, because 85 to 90% of the incidents happen as a direct result of what I've told you. Use it, don't use it, protest. The solution starts with you. Grant me the serenity to change the things I cannot accept and accept the things that I cannot change. What you can't accept is the continuation, and you cannot continue to be single parents if you have not got a father. Be a father. Don't do to your children what your dad did to you. If you are a woman, make sure he marries you first before you have children. Otherwise, your life will suffer. It doesn't make you a bad person if you have a child out of wedlock. It makes your life miserable. Don't do it. I'm not going to be popular for this one, but frankly, I don't care because I'm Dean Haystack and I'm just a guy who gives a damn. If you can work out the oxymoron on that one.